Hey everyone, back tuning into the second spring update from GazWeathers.com. We did the first update in December when we had a look at some seasonal models to see what they were suggesting may happen in the United Kingdom for the spring of 2015. We're going to do the second update today, and then we'll do the final and official GazWeathers forecast next month in February. So we're getting on. We're into a second of three updates, second of a trilogy. Alright, so make it sound a little bit more exciting. Second of a trilogy of updates today. Now, before I get on with that, just to say about the ads, there's links to articles on most of the pages at GazWeathers.com. Have a browse through the widgets. If there's any articles that you're interested in, just click through. There's lots of ads on lots of the pages at GazWeathers, so have a look at those ads, and if there's anything there that you're interested in, just click through. You'll be able to help support the website. You're helping to support GazWeathers by doing that. So thanks so much for getting involved. Thanks for doing that. So just to quickly talk about what happened last month before we go on with this month's update. The first update for spring of 2015 sort of suggested temperatures on the disappointing side, really, average to a little bit cooler than average, if anything, for the spring, and the rainfall was coming out. Perhaps there wasn't really clear seal for rainfall, but perhaps a little bit above average overall. If you wanted to come up with a seal, it was perhaps a little bit above average. So it wasn't a great update, the first one. Quite disappointing, really. Cool, unsettled spring was sort of the idea, and we'll have a look now and see whether that's maintained, where we have another trend from this month's updates. Just to say that we're going to be without a couple of the models, without the Russian model this month, because they didn't update. I don't know why they didn't update. They should update on the first day of the month. Maybe they had a bit too much Hogmanay enjoyment on the new year, and they forgot to update it on the first, and they just haven't bothered for the rest of the month. So I'll see whether it updates for next month's update anyway. But we're without Russian this month. We're also without the APEC because they haven't updated either. They normally update around the 24th, 25th. I'm doing the video on the 24th of January. They haven't updated yet. They'll be updating any time, but I've run out of time, unfortunately, for that. So we're without the APEC, which is a collaboration of Southern Hemisphere Met agencies. We're without the Russian. Hopefully they'll be back on board next month. We're going to start off with the UK Met, our very own UK Met Office model. We're starting off with the sea level pressure anomaly for the spring, March to May, and it's not great blue, it's extrapolating to low pressure. Orange, red, it's extrapolated to high pressure. What we're seeing here for the spring is I've got an anomalous trough of low pressure in there across the country. The jet stream is going around that trough, something like that. So that isn't a particularly good starting point for this spring by any means. That's an unsettled spring. Deep trough in there over the country. Temperatures would be on the disappointing side. It will also be very unsettled with above average rainfall coming through. The temperature anomaly is coming out ever so slightly above average. I would probably correct that down on that sort of setup, maybe to near normal or a little bit below average. It's not a warm spring signal by any means, but we are on the slightly milder side of the average there. And unsurprisingly, because we're sticking a trough of low pressure over the top of the country, we're coming out wetter than average in those green colours. So pretty disappointing spring from the UK Met there. Not a great place to be starting off with. Now we've got the we've got the JMA next, and the Japanese model only goes out to April at this point. We haven't got the full update yet from the JMA, so we're just doing March and April at the moment. What we see for March is that we've got a ridge of high pressure to the south over Spain and Portugal. We've got a trough of low pressure in the Atlantic. The jet stream's probably going through something like that, so it's a relatively unsettled month, but it should be a mildish month. The winds should be coming in from a west or southwesterly type direction on that sort of setup. I should just say that on most of these long range charts, we're right on the far right hand corner of the chart as you're looking at it. The temperatures are coming out okay for March. We're a little bit above average, and on a southwesterly flow you would sort of expect that would be a little bit above average for March. The rainfall is coming out near normal to a little bit above average. That's because we're bringing a jet stream through the country. It's not a washout of a month, but it's a little bit wetter than average and a little bit milder than average. The mean wind flow indicated by the arrows, not sure if you make this out, but they are generally southwesterly to westerly. So it's not a bad March there, really. About what you would expect for an early spring month. That's in contrast to April, because things, I can tell you, go downhill for April, and the reason is that, again, similar to the UK Met, actually, we're sticking a trough of low pressure right in over the top of the country, and you can't really make it out, but all of this yellow up here is an area of high pressure, so we've actually got a little bit of northern blocking showing up there, and that would be entrenching cold or cool air into that trough of low pressure that's over the top of the country. So it's not a great signal for April. Things do deteriorate if the Japanese model is correct as we go through into April. Look at this, the temperatures are coming out cooler or colder than average. Really quite chilly month being signalled there. Rainfall above average, obviously you would expect it with a trough over the country, so wetter than average April. Cool and wet really sums it up. And the wind arrows show that we're bringing the air in from a northerly or northeasterly direction into that trough of low pressure. So that would allow for late season frost. Gardeners beware. It could be some damaging frost as we go through into April. And of course, it's still possible to get fairly significant snowfalls, especially in the north in April, especially the early part of April. So you won't be able to rule out snow really with this for April. A very disappointing month coming up if that is correct. We'll have the full update from the Japanese model for the whole of the spring for next month's update. The experimental NASA model next, and again, this is a 500 meter height anomaly chart. The red colours are again extrapolating to high pressure, blues extrapolating to low pressure. Now I've got a ridge of high pressure up over Scandinavia for the spring. This is the anomaly for March to May. It doesn't look too bad, but I think in all of this white, what we've got just here, we've probably got some sort of trough of low pressure in this zone. I would expect as we get close to the time, we'll find this filling up with blue colours. You notice there's not a great deal of blue on these charts, so you sort of have to read between the lines here. We've got a bit of a trough here. That would be a very deep trough on this sort of chart. But I think this is a trough just here, more or less to the west and over the country. So what looks like potentially quite a decent anomaly isn't as good as it looks. If you have a look at the temperature, you'll see that we're coming out near normal to maybe even hinting a little bit cooler than average. Certainly out in the Atlantic, it's a bit cooler than average. But warmth is over and across eastern parts of Europe. That's where we've got those yellow colours there in the east of Europe. So, yeah, I think that's not as good as it looks, really, that anomaly. A relatively cool spring will be on the way on that setup. The rainfall is coming out, again, about average. But I would suspect if there is a trough somewhere in there around the northwest of Europe, say somewhere around here, I would expect this zone to become a great deal wetter in the event that did happen. So the NASA model looks okay, and it just proves the point really that with these longer range models you sometimes do have to read between the lines, and it's not as good really as it looks. The CFS V2 700 millibar heights for the spring shows that I've got a trough of low pressure out to west country, so that's about where I'd expect the trough to be with the JMA really, or with the NASA model, I should say. The trough out to the west of the country, the jet stream coming through like that, a relatively cool, a relatively unsettled spring would ensue, I think, on that sort of 700 millibar height anomaly. Breaking this down into monthly periods, we see that for March we get this trough right over top of the country, so it's not a good month at all for March, bringing the jet stream through like that, and maybe even push it down a little bit there as well into Mediterranean. The overall signal is that it's a cool and unsettled month coming up for March. I'm not sure it'll be all that cool actually. The flow could be sort of Atlantic based, so maybe near normal temperatures, but certainly unsettled. The April anomaly looks like this, again, trough of low low pressure very much around the country just to the west. The jet stream again going something like that. So again, it's an unsettled month and probably relatively cool as well. Notice the trough though here is to the west of the country, whereas with the JMA it's over and slightly to the east of the country with a little bit of northern blocking. So this isn't again a particularly cold signal for April, but it is unsettled. And then May actually is a funny one for May. We've got this trough of low pressure being pushed back towards Greenland. I'm not sure why it's doing that because there's no real ridge just here. You will think if the trough is becoming centred around here, you'd have some sort of a ridge to the east of it, say in that sort of zone. No real signal for that. The ridge is just there off the coast of Newfoundland and again a little bit through the Mediterranean. But I think overall I would say the signal on this one is for the jet stream to be coming through. Again, something like that, unless we were to see more evidence that there's some sort of ridging going on to the northeast or east of the country, then I'll be reluctant to say that's what is happening with that. But it could be, because why the trough is coming centred around Greenland, being pushed back from where it is in March, April, I'm not sure. And of course May is a time when you tend to get a lot of easterly winds and high pressure over Scandinavia, so maybe May could be reverting more to a typical type May pattern. The overall temperature forecast from the CFSV2 for the spring is about average, as it is for most parts of Europe. I think that's really more because the model just hasn't got a clue, actually. Don't rate the CFSV2 all that highly. Getting on my soapbox a little bit with that one, but I use it a lot because there's so much information you can get from it, but I don't rate it. And that's the reason why, because it's suggesting that from Ireland in the west and Portugal over towards Russia, there's very little warmer or colder than average temperature anomalies going on, and that can't possibly be right, can it? We know that's not right. So something's wrong there. It hasn't really got the signal in terms of the temperature anomaly for the spring. And in terms of the rainfall anomaly, again, it hasn't really got the signal there for the spring. So I always prefer to break this down into monthly periods, really. And I think overall it's going for an unsettled spring, which you look at those monthly anomalies, I think it's an unsettled spring, but it's picking up on a little bit of confusion about May. But overall, I would expect it to be a relatively cool, relatively wet spring on that sort of a pattern. Hugh Vanderdoel next. Now, this is always a little bit different. These are analogue-based forecasts based on the sea surface temperature anomalies across the globe. So Hugh developed this in December based on the sea surface temperature anomalies that were across the globe in December, and then from that he's created a forecast going forward. These are 500 millibar heights, so what we see for Hugh Vanderdoel for the spring is that we've got an area of high pressure above average heights in here up to the north of the country, a trough out in the Atlantic. The flow is probably going something like that, easterly, southeasterly. So that's a little bit better for the spring. Could be cool for March and April, but probably a bit warmer for May. And it's not overly wet on that sort of a setup either. I know a lot of you are wondering about Hugh Vanderdoel's forecast because his winter forecast, which was for a very cold winter for most of Europe, appears to be busting at the moment. So a bit of a caveat applied with this. But anyway, I throw it in because the charts are there. You might as well use them. That's what Hugh is seeing for the spring. The precipitation anomaly is coming out drier than average. We're in those yellow colours there, and you wouldn't be surprised at that because there's an area of high pressure sitting around and to the north of the country. So drier than average spring would be expected. And the temperature anomaly is coming out about average as well. Going on to the Beijing Climate Centre next, what we see here for the spring, this is the 500 millibar height anomaly for March to May, is that I've got a ridge of high pressure in the Atlantic to the west of the country, low pressure up to the north. That's a pretty good one. The jet stream is up here, it's going to the north of the country with ridging out to west and the southwest. I think that's fairly decent. That's the best one we've had so far, I think, for the spring. We're not plagued by the easterlies that we get on Hugh Vanderdoel's setup, and again, the low pressure is pushed right up to the north of the country with the jet stream. So I think that's pretty good. Let's have a look at the temperature anomaly, and it's near normal. So perhaps not as warm as I would like it to be on that sort of setup. It's a little bit above above average in the north, but overall coming out near normal there. From the Beijing climate centre of the BCC. The precipitation anomaly is coming out a bit drier than average, so that's okay, and you would expect that with high pressure sitting somewhere around here. You would expect it to be drier than average just here, and that is about what we get with that, what we expect. And as I say, the jet stream is going off like that, so that's the reason it's quite a dryish sort of signal for the spring. And although the temperature anomaly is near normal, I think I'll probably push that up to warmer than average. So that's the best one that we've had. The Beijing climate centre is the best one that we've had if you want it to be dry and relatively mild, or maybe later on even warm for this spring. Jamstec IOD, and well, look at this, a cold and average spring being signalled here from Jamstec. Jamstec is always one of those models that seems to go quite cold and then corrects it back later on, although this is colder. Interestingly, this is a colder update from Jamstec than we had last month. So normally what you get with this model is at the first month, but we do this, it's very cold, and then it sort of gets corrected to a milder solution as we get closer to the time frame. With this one, we've actually gone colder on the second update compared to the first update, so that's quite interesting how that's happened. It is going for colder than average spring. Most of America also, you'll notice, coming out colder than average. It'll be interesting where the Jamstec goes with that next month. It may correct it to a much milder solution, as it normally does, or it may keep it quite cold. We'll have to see where that goes. I'll be interested to see. The precipitation anomaly tells the story of why that's happening, why it's going for a colder than average spring, because we've got these drier than average conditions up here around Iceland, quite a lot of northern blocking, low pressure across certain parts of Europe. So the flow is going something like that from a northerly or northeasterly direction. So that's why it goes colder than average for the spring. In terms of us actually becoming out near normal with the precipitation anomaly, but it's really the temperatures that are interesting on that update. And then finally, we're at the last model now, going through to the Brazilian, and this one is always a little bit different. It always catches us out because it's a 500 millibar height anomaly, but the colours are different with this one. Red is actually indicating low pressure below average heights, whilst blue is indicating above average heights, high pressure. The upshot is we're more or less back where we started, although the colours are the opposite. We're more or less back where we started with the UK Met, because we're sticking a trough of low pressure right over top of the country. Look at that, red colours are in there, that's below average heights. Very disappointing spring. The jet stream would be going something like that, so we're probably on the cold side of the jet, under a trough of low pressure. It isn't going to be particularly great. So let's have a look at the temperature forecast from this one, and we see that the temperatures, as you always get with these long-range models, erring on the side of a little bit milder than average, although not a desperately warm spring by any means, but certainly a little bit above average. With that trough in there over the country, similar to the UK Met, I would correct that down actually to nearer normal, to cooler than average. And then in terms of the precipitation anomaly, the signal there is wetter around the north and west of Europe. Got those blue colours in there. Actually for the UK it's nearer normal, but blue gives the game away really around the coastal areas. That's where we've got the greatest chance of having high rainfall, of course. And with the trough in there, it's going to be an unsettled spring. So it's not a great update again. The Beijing climate centre is the best one that we've got. That's the one that's going for the driest, warmest conditions, I think, for the spring. Hoog's not too bad, but it would probably be very easterly spring on Hoog, Vanadul's setup. And they're not great. East winds aren't great in the spring either. All the other models are really quite disappointing, I have to say. They all sort of continue the theme that we had last month, which is for a relatively cool, relatively unsettled spring as well. The Brazilian at the end and the UK Met at the beginning are probably the worst of it. They've got the trough right in over top of the country. Very disappointing spring if they come off. And the Jamstec is pretty cold as well. So overall, that is the direction of traffic with these longer range models. cool and unsettled for the second update. We'll see where it all goes next month, and next month of course will be the final and official spring forecast from GazWeathers.com. After that, can you believe it, we'll be going on to summer updates. That's it for now. Thanks for watching.